Support this motion by my friend Ferdinand Wanyonyi. This motion is timely because, as it is stated in Article 60 of the Constitution, there are a number of things which ought to have been done up to now from the time when this Constitution of ours was promulgated, the 2010 Constitution. Some legislations ought to have been done by this Parliament, at least to regulate of our land, tenure and land use in Kenya, ought to have been at least legislated upon. Mr. Speaker, sir, in Kenya, as it is now, we are facing hardship of lack of food. And this lack of food is not that we don't have land to cultivate. The problem we have, Mr. Speaker, sir, is land use. Whereby land which is fertile enough for production of food is lying idle. It's not in use because, Mr. Speaker, sir, the same land is being owned by people whom we call telephone farmers. Most of them are living in Nairobi, and they are not using that land for the benefit of Kenyans. My support of this motion, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that if you go to developed countries like Germany, Belgium, and those others in Europe and even parts of America, you'll find that there are tracts of land which are arable and they are being used for production of food. And then the public, citizens of the country, live in a well-programmed settlement, which settlement, Mr. Speaker, sir, has all the amenities which are necessary and which are required for human existence. You find in those settlements, there are shopping malls, there are places of residence. Those places of residence are supplied with electricity, sewage system, adequate water, and all the amenities which are necessary for a good human habitation. And then the rest of the land is commercially used to produce food commercially for the people of those countries in a way that the food will be enough for their consumption, and even they get extras to sell or even to export. And then they earn foreign currency out of that food which they sell from what they have produced. So my suggestion is that we should have that registration as it is supposed to be in Article 60 of the Constitution. And that registration, when it comes, because I tend to believe that there will be a bill following this motion in this Parliament, of which bill we are going to put regulations and other orders therein, of which is going to stipulate how we are going to be using that, to be using our land, and what size one is supposed to be owning, and if one has that big trunk of land which is not in use, what can he be paying the government so that the land cannot just be lying idle there, it's not commercially being used to benefit the Kenyans, and it's not earning the government any revenue. Because some of us, some even of the members of Parliament here, they have those pieces of land which are just lying idle because they have powers to purchase them. Go to Meru. You find large tracts of land all the way from Laikipia to the other side of Meru. That's Embu. And those big tracts of land are not in use. What is the government earning out of those big tracts of land? To traverse all the area up to Isiolo and the other side of Garissa, we have big tracts of land and they are owned by individuals. What is the government earning out of it? But the registration, as it is in this motion, If things are put in a place, Mr. Speaker, sir, it's my belief that those pieces of land are going to be beneficial to the Kenyans, because the tax paid for having those big trunks of land is going to benefit even the small man who does not have any other source of income in Kenya. Otherwise, there is what's supposed to be called land consolidation. We should move from the parochial idea of subdividing small pieces of land which cannot benefit anybody. Because even though it is said that the moment you subdivide these pieces of land, they give you incentives of how you are going to earn your earning through other methods, because you know that there is no land, there is no land of which you can use for production. But that's not the case. We shouldn't be thinking out of the box. We shouldn't be thinking of how we can survive by consolidating these small pieces of land and making them arable, or making them how they can even be used by farming them through machinery or through machines, mechanized farming. And there is no way we can have small fragments of pieces of land and use mechanized farming in them. So we should come out in a way that we should have a modality law, whereby we will have a minimum, a piece of land which one should own, and the maximum which one should own, so that at least the extras can either be given back to the government or to those people who are able to utilize them for commercial gains of all Kenyans. So I thereby, Mr. Speaker, sir, support this motion by my colleague Ferdinand, because it is well thought of, and it is the right time that we should implement Article 60 and 68 of the Constitution to have the full force of law. Because within a very short time, Mr. Speaker, sir, I know, if it had happened sometimes back that maybe I succeeded, it meant that these sections could have been dealt away with, because we could have maybe discarded this Constitution. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, I think that first, if we embark on implementing this Constitution, it's one of the best documents, and it has a solution of many problems which Kenyans have. I support the motion, Mr. Speaker, sir. Thank you.
The MP for Samburu County, the Honorable Pauline Lenguris. And members, we have barely 10 minutes to the end of the debate today, so if you could use even less, a fewer minutes, you would accommodate more.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for giving me this opportunity to contribute on the motion that is on the floor of this House. Mr. Speaker, we all understand that land is a very sensitive issue in Kenya that is supposed to be handled with a lot of care and caution. I think we have seen in this country so many cases, so many disputes that are related to land use and land fragmentation in Kenya. I heard my colleagues saying that there is idle land in Kenya, but to me, I believe that there is no idle land in Kenya, because land is either owned by an individual or owned by communities. In a place where I come from, land is owned communally. So in my place, there is no land that is idle or land that does not belong to anyone. Most of the land in the place that I represent is not put in use, not because people don't want to put into use, but it's because of the harsh climatic conditions. So people will find a lot of bare land that is not being used, but sometimes we use our land for grazing our animals. And you know, in the place where I represent, livestock is the main source of livelihood. We have also converted most of our land into conservancies, and conservancies belongs to communities. It is also one way of attracting tourists. Tourists come from all the way from abroad, and they come and see wild animals. It's also a source of income to this country and to the counties that we represent. So I stand here to oppose the motion, because I don't believe that there is any land that is barely idle in this country. If the government wants to put land that is not in use into practice, I think they can consult the owners, and the government can support them in facilitating them to be able to put the land into practice. One, by maybe giving them the technology or enabling them with a technology that can assist them, for example, in getting water for irrigation, drilling boreholes, making dams, and maybe we can put that land into agricultural practice. Because right now, because of the harsh climate, we are not able to use most of our land. And if given to other people, I don't think it's something that's acceptable. And also the Constitution of Kenya has given Kenyans the right to own property, the right to own land. So the government can lease the land if there is any land that is not into practice in most of the areas. For example, there is a big place in Laikipia. There are historical injustices of land, like the land in Laikipia. It's owned by very few individuals, and for many years, we have brought petitions to the country demanding the land back, but there is no response from the authorities. So I stand here as a pastoralist to oppose the motion on the floor that we cannot accept that kind of law in Kenya, and we want to be assisted by the current government that we have formed to be able to put most of our land into use. I submit, Mr. Speaker, and I oppose the motion.
Honorable Beatrice Elachi, are you on an intervention or you are contributing? Can you use less than 3 minutes?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'll use less than 3 minutes so that... Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this motion. This motion comes because we have Article 68 in the Constitution in the land chapter. And if we want to deal with it or remove it so that we go back to other things, then we have to go to a referendum and remove it. But for now, we must ask ourselves, Mr. Speaker, as we put this, it was to guide Kenyans, one, those who have minimum acres, to ensure they do not subdivide their lands. Mr. Speaker, when you look at Nairobi today, land has been subdivided. It has become plots. Today, the children of those who own this land are suffering and now languishing in poverty. And so, Mr. Speaker, even as we speak and look at the regulations, for those who are absentees landlords, they must now decide whether they want to continue using this land or you give the land to the communities also. Because we have people who are just absentees, like in Coast Province, like in other areas, and the land lives there and people are languishing in poverty. They cannot even farm it, and yet we have someone living abroad or in Qatar who owns this land. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, as I support, I would say let us agree as Kenyans. There was a purpose of this chapter. It was not to take the land where we have grazing or anything, but it was to deal with landlords who are absentees. And we must deal with this matter, Mr. Speaker. As I finalize, I think we need to look at this chapter of land properly, look at the regulations that we are given, but more importantly, bring an act so that for those who are with communal land, nobody is touching their land. But for those who are absentees landlords, we must deal with them, and we must give back land to the people of Coast Province, and also we protect Nairobi so that we don't share. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The MP for Kirinyaga Central, Honorable Joseph Gitari. Is there a problem with the system there? It's barely audible.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was saying that I never wanted to disturb my brother Wanyonyi, but I contacted him on the motive and where he's coming from. Speaker, I want to oppose this motion in the strongest possible words. Mr. Speaker, where we come from, we value pieces of land. How big, how small, that's not a problem. Mr. Speaker, I want to be on record to say that what I've gathered from my brother Wanyonyi is that he doesn't even know the number of surveyors in this country we have about more than 6,000 surveyors in this country, and they rely on that. This is not applicable in Central Kenya, because after consulting him, he is even telling me that the bare minimum would be 5 acres. Mr. Speaker, it's a bit wanting when people try to say that if, Mr. Speaker, you bought a piece of land, even it's 5,000 acres, that some people can come there and get part of it. Mr. Speaker, what I'm saying is, other people are in the business of fragmenting those land. Mr. Speaker, we are trying to usurp so many acts: the Physical Planning Act, the Surveying Act, the RAD Act of 2012, by introducing this motion. Mr. Speaker, I don't know the motive of this motion, but what we are saying that will be, if it had an amendment where we don't talk about minimum, and even we say that we don't, for the absentee roads, we give them taxes to the government. Mr. Speaker, I want to oppose with the strongest term. I thank you.
Honorable Lea Sopiato, MP for Kajiado County. Let a pastoralist speak after a landlord.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank you for this opportunity to make my contribution to this debate, which I'm totally opposing, because it has a lot of issues that when I'm looking at it, I am thinking that it shouldn't be what I'm seeing here. Mr. Speaker, I am particularly drawn to a line that says that a number of people own large tracts of land which are not utilized optimally. Mr. Speaker, I come from a pastoral community where we rear livestock, and livestock is our backbone for livelihoods. And Mr. Speaker, from the livestock, we get fees for our children to go to school, we get money to build our houses, and basically that is our way of livelihood, and that is our way of life. Mr. Speaker, for one cow to feed in land, you need 6 acres of land per year to feed one cow. And if I have 100 cows, Mr. Speaker, I need 600 acres of land to feed those cows in 1 year. Mr. Speaker, it is wrong to imply that because my land is not farmed, is idle land. For me, rearing of cows is a business that is economically viable for our community. That is our way of life, and that is how we do it. So judging my land that is idle, I just want to know the mechanism in which, or the yardstick that has been used to see land in my place and imagine that it is idle land. Simply because my way of life is not your way of life should not be put that it is idle land. Some of us are not farmers, and if you're farmers, we are livestock farmers. And so if I do not plow my land, and you pass by and you see large tracts of land that have not been farmed, does not really mean that that is idle land. My cows are my source of livelihood, and this is Kenya, where everyone is free to own land and sell it at their own free will to a willing seller and a willing buyer. If I'm not willing to sell mine, then government should not compel me and tell me how much acreage that I should have. Some of us have communal land, and these are our ancestral lands where we inherited from our parents. If someone did not inherit from their parents and they see mine that I inherited from my parents, they should not imply that it is idle and now I should share with them.